Live from sunny South Florida, broadcasting around the world. You're listening to the Dennis Hendrickson Podcast.
We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
My superpower is being honest. I will eat my neighbors.
From sunny South Florida, broadcasting around the world. Around the world. You're listening to the Dennis Hendrickson Podcast.
You are gay. You are a transgender. Why are you gay?
Watch your profanity.
Someone has to fucking flip the burgers, dumbass.
You're a fucking nerd. You're a fucking nerd. No one likes you. No one likes you.
We'll do it live. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to watch a movie, and the movie is going to be about communism. And this was filmed in 1984, and the person that's being interviewed is Yuri Bezmenov, and he was a former KGB agent who defected to the United States. And the reason why I think this is a very important movie or video to watch, interview, is because he is explaining everything that's going on in the United States and Europe right now. In other words, it's a best way that I could describe it is an outline of what is happening to us now. I mean, there's a more modern way, I guess you could describe it, with what's happening to us now, but it's Soviet communism, which I've mentioned quite frequently. And this particular individual will explain it to us in more detail and why it is they're doing what they're doing. It's a very good propaganda technique, very good way of destroying an enemy, and it's what's happening to us now. And in other words, it's sort of a leftover or a continuation of Soviet communism, and I like to say neo-Bolshevism. And rather than kind of go into the news and stuff like that tonight, I wanted to do a sort of a movie night and kind of discuss this interview with Yuri Bezmenov. And if anyone has any comments or anything like that, of course, leave them in the comment section and we can discuss them. But I think it's pretty interesting stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and play it now.
Press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union, it turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. One of his interesting assignments was to brainwash foreign diplomats when they visited Moscow. And he'll tell us a little bit about how they did this and how they planted information which eventually wound up in the press of the free world. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. Mr. Bezmenov, I'd like to begin by having you tell us a little bit about some of your childhood memories.
Well, the most vivid memory of my childhood was Second World War, or to be more precise, the end of the Second World War, when all of a sudden United States, from a friendly nation, which helped us to defeat Nazism, turned overnight into a deadly enemy. And it was very shocking because all newspapers were trying to present an image of belligerent, aggressive American imperialism. Most of the things that we were taught is that United States is aggressive power, which is just about to invade our beautiful, free, socialist country. That American CIA is dropping Colorado beetles on our beautiful potato fields to eliminate our crops. And each schoolboy had a picture of Colorado bug on the back page of his notebook. And we were instructed to go into collective fields to search for those little Colorado bugs. Of course, we couldn't find any. Neither we could find many potatoes. And that was explained again by the encroachments of the decadent imperialist power.
So here, and I'll try to not interrupt as much as I possibly can, but it's hard not to after watching this. But this propaganda you'll hear throughout this entire video, one of the things that he's talking about is, oh, well, the United States is dropping this insect into Mother Russia that is destroying the crops, the potato crops. And basically what Yuri Bezmenov is saying is that that's not true. We didn't see these bugs, but the reality was it wasn't the United States that was causing the issue with the crops and potatoes. It was actually Russia, and you'll see. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that what are we seeing now? And again, I'm going to do the best that I possibly can not to interrupt throughout this entire video. However, it's important to note the food system that in the United States right now is under attack. We have increased pricing. Many of our food manufacturing plants, processing plants are being destroyed. There is a reason to destroy the food cycle. When it comes to the processing, the delivery of food, the manufacturing of food, there is a reason why destroying it is a good thing for communism. It allows them to take control of the people.
The anti-American paranoia, hysteria in the Soviet propaganda was to of such a higher degree that many less skeptical people or less stubborn would really believe that the United States is just about to invade our beautiful motherland, and some secretly hope that it will come true.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Well, getting back to life inside the Soviet Union or inside communist countries in general, in this country, at the university level primarily, we read and hear that the Soviet system is different from ours, but not that different, and that there is a convergence developing between all of the systems of the world, and that really it doesn't make an awful lot of difference what system you live under, because you have corruption and dishonesty and tyranny and all that sort of thing. From your personal experience, what is the difference between life under communism and life in the United States?
Well, life is obviously very much different for simple reason that the Soviet Union is a state capitalist economically. It's a state capitalism where an individual has absolutely no rights, no value. His life is nothing. It's just like an insect. He is disposable. Whereby in the United States, even the worst criminal is treated as a human being. He has a fair trial, and some of them capitalize on their crimes. They publish their memoirs in their prisons and get handsomely paid by your crazy publishers. The differences of course, in the daily life are very various, depending on who.
And that's what's happening now today, is where you have what he just mentioned. How do we see, and how are the criminals portrayed in the United States? They're portrayed as heroes. Those who try to stop crime are portrayed as evil. And exactly what Yuri Bezmenov is talking about right there. And that's what's happening in the United States. There's a reversal of the bad guys are the good guys, the good guys are the bad guys.
Whom we are talking about. In my own private life, I never suffered from communism simply because I was brought up in a family of high-ranking military officer. Most of the doors were open for me. Most of my expenses were paid by the government, and I never had any troubles with the authorities or with the police. So, in other words, I would say I enjoyed, or I had good reasons to enjoy, all the advantages of so-called socialist system. My main motivations to defect had nothing to do with affluence. It was mainly moral indignation, moral protest, rebellion against the inhuman methods of the Soviet system.
Well, specifically, what did you object to?
I objected, first of all, against oppression of my own dissidents and intellectuals. And that was the most disgusting thing that I witnessed as a young man, young student, who was brought up at a very troublesome period in our history, from Stalin to Khrushchev, from total tyranny and oppression to some kind of liberalization. Second, when I started working for the Soviet embassy in India, to my horror, I discovered that we are millions times more oppressive than any colonial or imperialist power in the history of mankind. That my country brings to India not freedom, progress, and friendship between the nations, but racism, exploitation, and slavery. And of course economical inefficiency to this country. Since I fell in love with India, I developed something which by KGB standards is extremely dangerous thing. It's called split loyalty, when an agent likes a country of assignment more than his own country. I literally fell in love with this beautiful country, a country of great contrasts, but also great humility, great tolerance, and philosophical and intellectual freedoms. My ancestors used to live in caves and eat raw meat when India was a highly civilized nation 6,000 years ago. So obviously the choice was not to the advantage of my own nation. I decided to defect and to entirely dissociate myself from that brutal regime.
Mr. Bezmenov, we've read a lot about the concentration camps and the slave labor camps under the Stalin regime. Now the general impression in America is that those things are part of the past. Are they still going on today, or what is the status?
Yes. There is no qualitative change in the Soviet concentration camp system. There are changes in numbers of prisoners. Again, this is unreliable Soviet statistics. We don't know how many political prisoners are there in the Soviet concentration camps, but we sure know from various sources that at each particular time there are close to 25 to 30 million of Soviet citizens who are virtually kept as slaves in forced labor camp system.
There are recent reports that there are encampments that are being manufactured or created and built across the country. And this is alarming because these stories came out during COVID, and many people thought that these particular camps were developed, manufactured to house those who would not get vaccinated. It seems as if there's more of a reality that it was sort of a test to see what people thought of these camps during COVID, but in reality, these were being built for a more nefarious purpose, which is what Yuri Bezmenov is talking about now, for dissidents that are going to go against the communist regime that they are planning to take over the United States currently. Because, in my opinion, that is what they are trying to do right now.
The size of the population of a country like Canada is serving terms as prisoners.
Incredible.
So I would say that those intellectuals who try to convince American public that concentration camp system is a thing of the past are either conscientiously misleading public opinion, or they are not very intellectual people. They're selectively blind. They lack intellectual honesty when they say that.
Well, we've spoken about the intellectuals in this country and also the intellectuals in the Soviet Union. What about down at the broad mass level? Do the people in general, the working people, the workers in general in the Soviet Union, do they support the system? Do they tolerate it? What is their attitude?
Well, average Soviet citizen, if there is such an animal, of course, does not like the system because it hurts, it kills. He may not understand the reasons, he may not have enough information or educational background to understand. But I doubt very much there are many people who are conscientiously supporting the Soviet system. There are not such people in USSR. Even those who have all the reasons to enjoy socialism, people like myself, who were a member of journalistic elite, they also hate the system for different reasons, though. Not because they lack material affluence, but because they are unfree to think, they're in constant fear, duplicity, split personality. And this is the greatest tragedy for my nation.
Well, what do you think are the chances of the people actually overcoming their system or replacing it?
There is a great possibility that system will sooner or later be destroyed from within. There is a self-destructive mechanism built into any socialist or communist or fascist system, because there is lack of feedback, because the system does not rely upon loyalty of population. But until this Soviet junta is being supported by the Western so-called imperialists, that is, multinational companies, establishments, governments, and let's face it, intellectuals, so-called academia in the United States is famous for supporting the Soviet system. As long as the Soviet junta will keep on receiving credits, money, technology, grain deals, and political recognition from all these traitors of democracy or freedom, there is no hope, there is not much hope for changes in my country, and the system will not collapse by itself simply because it's being nourished by so-called American imperialism. This is the greatest paradox in history of mankind, when capitalist world supports and actively nourishes its own destructor.
That is an extremely important point. And what are we seeing right now? We're seeing this destruction of capitalism through communism. And the way that communism destroys is, you have Target, for example, that promotes LGBTQ, stock price goes down. Disney promotes LGBTQ, stock price goes down. Boeing, DEI, planes start falling out of the sky, stock price goes down. So you're seeing, and look at BlackRock and Larry Fink. We must control people's behaviors. This is a man who shouldn't be running anything, not alone a $1 trillion balance sheet company. And we're seeing right now what Yuri Bezmenov is explaining. We're seeing the destruction of the United States and capitalism, because capitalism is embracing communism. They're embracing these ridiculous things, these ridiculous ideologies, and it's destroying the companies. And the amazing thing to me is that the people that are in charge of these companies are supposedly intellectuals and smart people. And it turns out that you can go to an Ivy League institution, you can get this education, you can... CNBC can tell the investors how brilliant an individual is, but in reality, they're incompetent, they're buffoons, and they cannot run a company properly. I mean, just look at what's happening with Disney right now, and then James O'Keefe and O'Keefe Media. He is completely destroying that company. And who knows if it's going to pull out of the tailspin that it's in. It's highly doubtful. But watching, I mean, history always repeats itself. That is the thing that I guess that I'm trying to say here. Is here you have a guy in 1984 telling you, don't let this shit happen, because if you do, it's not going to end well. And sure enough, we're letting it happen, and it's not ending well.
I think you're trying to tell us something.
Oh,
in
yes.
This country.
I'm trying to tell you that it has to be stopped unless you want to end up in Gulag system and enjoy all the advantages of socialist equality. Working for free, catching fleas on your body, sleeping on planks of plywood in Alaska this time, I guess. That's where Americans will belong, unless they will wake up, of course, and force their government to stop aid.
And he's telling people back in 1984, wake the fuck up. Wake the fuck up. Because if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to end up in Soviet gulags. Because the bottom line is, communism it's about as simple as this. It's people who don't want to work that want to live off of those that do work. And when that system breaks down, which it does, and it's inevitable that it breaks down, the people who don't want to work want to force those who will work to work through violence and death. That's it.
Leading Soviet fascism.
Well, you told us a moment ago why you left the system. I'd like to hear the details of how you did it. It must have been a very dangerous thing.
It was not so dangerous, it was crazy. First of all, because defecting in India is virtually impossible, thanks to very strong pressure from the Soviet government.
Excuse me, you were in India. On assignment at that time.
Yes, I was working for the Soviet embassy in New Delhi as a press officer. And defecting for a Soviet diplomat is next to impossible. It's a suicide, as I said, because a great friend Indira Gandhi pushed a law through parliament which says, and I quote, no defector from any country has a right of political asylum in any embassy on the territory of Indian Republic, which is a masterpiece of hypocrisy. No other defector but the Soviet one needs a political asylum. So knowing that perfectly well, I planned a craziest possible way to defect. I studied counterculture in India. There were thousands of young American boys and girls with no shoes, long hair, smoking hash and marijuana, studying sometimes Indian philosophy, sometimes simply pretending that they studied. And they greatly annoyed Indian police, and they were laughing stock of Indians because obviously they were good-for-nothing students.
Sounds like the left of today.
I studied carefully where they congregate, what routes they travel, what language they speak, what do they smoke. And one day I simply joined a group of hippies to avoid detection of Indian police. I was dressed as a typical hippie with blue jeans, long camise shirts with all kind of nice decorations like beads, long hairs. I bought a wig because for several weeks I had to turn myself from a conservative Soviet diplomat into a very progressive American hippie. And that was the only way that I could avoid detection. It was very interesting experience, but it was necessary because from my own knowledge as a member of Soviet embassy staff, I knew that there were many cases when Soviet defectors were betrayed by Indian police, and also some Western embassies played a very dirty role in betraying the Soviet defectors. According to our information, they were some, I wouldn't call them double agents, but simply immoral people working for the United States Embassy. And confining in people like this would be a suicide. So I had to be extremely careful. I could not trust anyone. And that was the...
Big surprise. He couldn't trust any American, of course. Just like we can't trust any American today.
Was the reason for such a crazy way to defect.
Well, had you been caught in the act of trying to get out, what would have happened to you?
Oh, most likely I would end up in concentration camp. Or, depending on the situation and on the whim of some bureaucrat in KGB, maybe even executed. This is normal practice. Quietly, of course, not publicly. But that would be the end of my defection, of course.
Well, when did you finally make it to the United States?
In 1970, after about 6 months of debriefing in Athens by the CIA, and I presume FBI too, they let me go first to Germany, then to Canada. That was my decision. I had to change my identity to protect my family and my friends in USSR. And also I was a little bit paranoid knowing that both Soviet KGB and probably some double agents within the American system may be after me. So I wanted to settle down as far away as possible. I requested CIA to give me some kind of new identity and just let me go on my own. And I settled in Canada. I was a student. I changed many professions, from farm help and laundry truck driver to language instructor and broadcaster for Canadian Broadcasting Corporations in Montreal.
Well, have you had any threats on your life or any unpleasant
Yes. In about 5 years, KGB eventually discovered that I am working for Canadian Broadcasting. I made a very big mistake. I started working for overseas service of CBC, which is similar to Voice of America, in Russian language. And of course, monitoring service in USSR picked up every new voice. every new announcer they would make it a point to discover who he is. And in 5 years, sure enough, slowly but surely, they discovered that I am not Thomas Schumann, that I am Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, and that I'm working for Canadian Broadcasting, and undermining beautiful détente between Canada and USSR. And the Soviet ambassador Alexander Yakovlev made it his personal effort to discredit me. He complained to Pierre Trudeau, who is known to be a little bit soft on socialism.
Keep up the good work.
And
we need more alternatives.
The management of CBC behaved in a very strange, cowardly way, unbecoming to representatives of an independent country like Canada. They listened to every suggestion that Soviet ambassador gave, and they started shameful investigation, analyzing content of my broadcasts to USSR. And sure enough, they discovered that some of my statements were probably would be offending to the Soviet Politburo. So I had to leave my job. And of course, subtle intimidations. They would say something like, please cross the street carefully because, you know, traffic is very heavy in Quebec. And fortunately, I know about the psychology and the logic of activity of the KGB, and I never allowed myself to be intimidated. This is the worst thing. This is what they expect a person, a defector, to be intimidated. Once they spot that you are scared, they keep on developing that line, and then eventually you either have to give up entirely and work for them, or they neutralize you. They would definitely stop all kind of political activity, which they failed to do in my case, because I was stubbornly working for the Canadian Broadcasting. And in response to their intimidations, I said that, look, this is a free country, and I am as free as you are, and I also can drive very fast. And gun control is not yet established in Canada, so I had a couple of good shotguns in my basement. So welcome to visit me someday with your Kalashnikovs machine guns. So obviously it didn't work. Intimidation didn't work. So they tried different approach, as I described. They approach.
That's an important thing that he said. I live in a country where they can't take the guns away from me. However, what's happening now in Canada? What's happening in Canada is you can't even have a handgun. So you're seeing what's happening with Soviet communism moving to Canada, where this guy defected to. And he's not the only one sounding this alarm. There were a lot of people during the Canadian trucker protests who came from communist Eastern European nations and said, this is what I fled from. This is what I tried to get away from. And here I am being subjected to exactly what it is I tried to get away from. And that's what Yuri Bezmenov is saying. And so, you know, it's a very simple thing for us to figure out. And we get into these, and I say it over and over and over again, we get into these false debates. We get into the minutia of these silly arguments. The bottom line is, it's communists trying to take over capitalist countries. And you can argue all day long capitalism and communism and socialism. The bottom line is that capitalism in its purest form, and not crony capitalism, is the best way to go. And the government's purpose is to be the referee, to make sure that somebody within the capitalist system isn't cheating. It's that simple. That way, there are no kings and queens. There is fair competition. But of course, as human beings as they are, the scumbag pieces of shit that they are, there are people who wish to be in control of everyone. Those are the types of people we cannot tolerate. And that is what we're dealing with right now.
On the highest level, on the level of Canadian bureaucracy.
And on that level they were successful.
On that level they were successful. On individual level they failed flat.
Mr. Bezmenov has brought a series of slides with him that he has taken from the Soviet Union, and I think this is a good time to take a look at the slides.
Yes.
Now, the viewers will be able to see these slides as we talk about them.
Yes, this is a collection of slides which are, some of them are snapshots from my family album, some of them are documents which I smuggled from the Soviet embassy, and some are reproductions from local mass media. I usually show them to establish my credibility as a defector. This is a picture of my native town, Mytishi, about 20 miles north from Moscow. Characteristically, there is a statue of Comrade Lenin in the central square. This is myself at the age of 7. Again, characteristically, under the statue of Comrade Stalin extending his friendly hand to peoples of the world. At that age, of course, I was still idealistically minded young communist, and I still believe that sooner or later things will go for better. But I realized that the system stinks, that something is fishy, and that ideology is fake. And the propaganda about advanced Soviet agriculture simply didn't meet the criteria of reality. If they talk about abundance of food and there is none in the stores, there must be something wrong. My father was, he is on the left here, my father was officer of the General Staff of the Soviet Army. He was inspector of land forces, Soviet troops stationed in countries like Mongolia, Cuba, East European countries. Were he alive today, most likely he would be inspecting Soviet troops in Nicaragua, Angola, and many other parts of the world. Fortunately, he died and he didn't see the disgrace, because deep inside he was a Russian patriot. He didn't like the idea of expanding Soviet military might, especially in the areas where we were not welcomed at all. Unlike many other military officers, he was reporting directly to the Minister of Defense, bypassing KGB and diplomatic service. In other words, he was a trusted military professional. And my impression that this type of people are much less hawkish and adventuristic than party bureaucrats in Kremlin. When American mass media describes Soviet military as potentially dangerous counterpart for Pentagon, I simply laugh, because I know better. I know that the most dangerous part of the Soviet power structures are not military at all. Most likely, if they come to power in my country, they'll be more sensible negotiators for nuclear disarmament and withdrawal of the Soviet troops from many parts of the world.
But if someone from the party structure or the KGB structure were to give the orders for a military intervention,
they have to obey,
they
yes,
would follow.
because they are professional military. But they, you see, the triangle of power and hate in USSR is the party at the top, the party elite, the oligarchy of the party, then the military and the KGB at the bottom. They hate each other. And the most hated triangle, the most hated corner of the triangle is the Communist Party bureaucrats. They are the most adventuristic, senile megalomaniacs. They can start war. I wouldn't be surprised. Not the military. They know what war is. Yes. At least my...
Okay, again, very important statement that he just made. And this is what's weird about this. This is a guy who worked for the KGB, where at the time we legitimately had an enemy with the USSR. And now we are the communists in essence, wanting to start a war with Russia. And what he just said is the military understands what it's like to have a nuclear war. But those who are involved outside of the military have no idea. And that's what we're dealing with right now with the United States, with the saber rattling that's going on and dealing with Ukraine and everything else is, no problem. We can do whatever it is that we want to do and provoke Russia, and not even thinking for a second what nuclear war might actually be, when in essence, I'm sure the military is saying, you have no idea what you're in for if we do that. It's amazing how the roles now have reversed to where the United States is the USSR and Russia is now really what all of us as Americans want the United States to be. Those who really know what's going on, those of us who understand what's going on, we want Russia. We want the United States to be what Russia is now. Christian, white, etc., etc.
Father did. This is the picture taken at the entrance of my Institute of Oriental Languages. It's a part of Moscow State University. I graduated in 1963. And now,
excuse me, which one were you on?
I am on the right.
You're on the right.
And on the left is my my schoolmate Vadim Smirnov, who later was an apparatchik in the Central Committee of the Soviet Union Communist Party.
What is an apparatchik?
It's a functionary, something like civil service in British Empire. Someone who is never fired from the service. He stays there internally. He may not be promoted too high, but he's a dependable bureaucrat who will stay forever. I studied not only languages, but also history, literature, even music. I'm on this picture. I'm trying to learn how to play Indian musical instrument. I even tried to look like an Indian when I was second-year student.
Not bad, really.
Yes, actually, it was strongly encouraged by the instructors in my school, because the graduates of my school were later on employed as diplomats, foreign journalists, or spies. As every Soviet student, I was, quote-unquote, volunteering for harvesting grain in Kazakhstan. This is the biggest agricultural blunder of the Soviet government. But I didn't have much choice, of course, because the communist motto borrowed from the Bible says, "Those who do not work shall not eat." And you can see me eating, therefore I was working, and you can see how happy I was about it.
Those who do not work do not eat. But it should go deeper than that, and that's where communism falls short. Those who do not create and produce should not eat. So that is an interesting kind of saying or comment from the USSR. Those who do not work don't eat. But who are you paying those who are working from? The only way that you can pay those who are working for a communist government are from those who are producing, essentially against their will. In a capitalist society, people are working and paying taxes, and then they are paying through those taxes the salaries of those from a limited government. That's an important distinction to make.
I went through a very extensive physical and military training, including the military games in areas, suburban areas of Moscow, And here, for example, we are on a tour in Arkhangelsk area. And by the end of my training in school, I was recruited by the KGB. This picture was taken on that day, and you can see again how happy it feels to be recruited by the KGB.
Our conversation with Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, who is a defector from the Soviet Union, a former propaganda agent for Novosti and the KGB, will continue after this message.
As every student in USSR, I went through very extensive physical and military training and civil defense training too. Unlike in the United States, where civil defense is virtually non-existent, zero. In USSR, every student, whatever his major subject, has to go through very extensive 4-year military and civil defense training. You can see me here with a group of students during one of the war games near Moscow. The main idea, of course, is to prepare a huge reserve army of the USSR. Each student has to graduate as a junior lieutenant. In my case, it was administrative and military intelligence service. My first assignment was to India as a translator with the Soviet Economical Aid Group, building refinery complexes in Bihar state and Gujarat state. At that time, I was still naively, idealistically believing that what I was doing contributes to the understanding and cooperation between the nations. It took me quite a number of years to realize that what we were bringing to India was a new type of colonialism, 1,000 times more oppressive and exploitative than any colonialism or imperialism in history of mankind. But at that time I was still hoping that, well, maybe it's not that bad, could be worse, and things may go for better. And I even tried to implement the beautiful Marxist motto, proletarians of all the countries unite. I tried to unite with a nice Indian girl, and I was fascinated by Indian culture, by the family life in this country. But obviously Communist Party had different plans for my genes, so I had to marry this beautiful Russian girl. In the span of my career, I married 3 times. Most of these marriages were marriages of convenience.
How about that? Couldn't marry an Indian, but had to marry somebody who was also Russian. How racist is that?
On advice from the Department of Personnel. This is normal practice in USSR. When a Soviet citizen is assigned to a foreign job, he has to be married, either to keep family in USSR as hostages, or, if it's a convenience marriage like mine, so that the husband and wife are virtually informers on each other to prevent defection or contamination by decadent imperialist or capitalist ideas. In my case, I hated that girl so much that the moment I landed in Moscow, we were divorced, and I married later, second time. By the end of my first assignment in India, I was promoted to the position of public relation officer. You can see me here translating a speech by a Soviet boss.
And you're on the right.
I'm on the right here, yes. And it was, the occasion was commissioning of the refinery complex in Bihar, Barauni. Back in Moscow, I was immediately recruited by Novosti press agency, which is a propaganda and ideological subversion front for the KGB. 75% of the members of the Novosti are commissioned officers of the KGB. The other 25 are, like myself, co-opted agents who are assigned to specific operations. In this particular case, you can see me talking to students of Lumumba Friendship University in Moscow. This is a huge school under the direct control of the KGB and Central Committee, where future leaders of the so-called national liberation movements are being educated and selected carefully. And some of them have absolutely, this, for example, is a group of students from Lumumba. They don't look like students at all. They look more like military, and that's exactly what they were. They were dispatched back to their countries to be leaders of the so-called national liberation movements, or to be translated into normal human language, leaders of international terrorist groups. Another area of activity when I was working for the Novosti was to accompany groups of so-called progressive intellectuals, writers, journalists, publishers, teachers, professors of colleges. You can see me here in Kremlin. I'm second on the left, with a group of Pakistani and Indian intellectuals. Most of them
Do we have breaking news, Kazan? Washington President Joe Biden is expected to discuss the future of his re-election campaign with family at Camp David on Sunday, following a nationally televised debate Thursday that left many fellow Democrats worried about his ability to beat former President Donald Trump in November. Yeah, not a surprise. I wonder who it's going to be. I mean, my thought is, as long as he's still standing, they're going to keep him in no matter what. That he literally has to fall over before they're going to take somebody out and or put somebody in to replace him. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, let me know, Kazan, if you have anything that comes up.
Pretended they don't understand that we are actually working on behalf of the Soviet government and the KGB. They pretended that they are actually being guests, VIP intellectuals, that they are treated according to their merits and their intellectual abilities. For us, they were just a bunch of political prostitutes to be taken advantage for various propaganda operations. Therefore, you can see perfectly well the senior colleague of mine on the left doesn't really have that much respect on his face, and myself with a very skeptical smile, typical KGB sarcastic smile, anticipating another victim of ideological brainwashing. This is how a typical conference in Novosti headquarters in Moscow looked like. Sitting in the middle is Boris Burkov, the then director of Novosti press agency, high-ranking party bureaucrat in the Department of Propaganda. I am standing next to a famous Indian poet, Sumitranandan Pant. He was famous because he was an author. He was the author of a famous poem titled Rhapsody to Lenin. That's why he was invited to USSR, and everything was paid by the Soviet government. Pay special attention to number of bottles on the table. This is one of the ways to kill the awareness or curiosity of foreign journalists. One of my functions was to keep foreign guests permanently intoxicated the moment they land at Moscow airport. I had to take them to the VIP lounge and toast to...
There you go, too. How... And I'm sure that's what goes on today is, back then they just got people drunk. Today they just get people rich. So we're going to go ahead and pay you, like Rachel Maddow, $30 million or $30,000 an episode, $30,000 a day to just essentially say what we want you to say. And, even now Tim Pool, he posts this Israel derangement thing. It's obvious now that Tim Pool is making millions of dollars a month off of YouTube primarily because he is a shill for Israel. Kazan, I think he's getting swapped out, but I really don't know who with. Big Mike might be their best bet if he's willing to go along with it, in my opinion. I don't know who else they have. Can't really think of one decent candidate. There are some people that are saying that there's no way that they can get around Kamala Harris, that she has to be, because of the racial thing and because the fact that she's VP, that there's no way of getting around it. I don't know if that's, realistic or not. We'll have to see. But, she's sort of stayed out of the spotlight. And, the Gavin Newsom thing is he's too white, of course. And, putting Big Mike in there is replacing Kamala Harris, who's second in line because she's the VP. I don't know. Yeah, they definitely have themselves in a pickle for sure. But I'll tell you what, man, what a crazy time we're living in right now, isn't it?
Friendship and understanding between the nations of the world. Glass of vodka, then the second glass of vodka. And in no time, my guests would be feeling very happy. They would see everything in kind of pink, nice color. And that's the way I had to keep them permanently for the next 15 or 20 days. At a certain point in time, I had to withdraw alcohol from them so that some of them who are the most recruitable would feel a little bit shaky, guilty, trying to remember what they were talking last night. That's the time to approach them with all kind of nonsense, such as joint communique or statement for Soviet propaganda. That's the time they are the most flexible. And of course, what they didn't understand, they didn't realize or pretended not to realize, that myself, who was drinking together with them, was not drinking at all. I had ways to get rid of alcohol through various techniques, including special pills which were given to me by my colleagues. But they were taking it seriously. In other words, they would consume quite large volumes of alcohol and feel quite uneasy next morning. In 1967, the KGB attached me to this magazine, Look magazine.
So, as you can see, what he's talking about is using alcohol to get people drunk and then get them in compromising positions. Well, what do you think that's not, they didn't graduate to what Jeffrey Epstein's doing now? That they didn't say, oh, well, alcohol is one thing, but those who don't drink, there's always something, by the way. It's so funny, when you talk to people and they're like, oh, I don't drink, or I'm a vegetarian, or, they always want to tell you that they don't do this or they don't do that. There's always a vice. There's always something that they're addicted to. So somebody who doesn't drink alcohol does some sort of fucking drug like cocaine or something. Somebody who doesn't eat meat or is a vegetarian eats candy like it goes out of style. So there's always something out there that someone will tell you, oh, I don't do this, I don't do that. There's something that you do that's not good. And at some point, obviously, these guys graduated to, okay, well, we can't get them, when they're drinking, but now we can get them when they're on Epstein Island doing wacky shit there. And put them on camera there. So they always graduate to something bigger and better. That's what they do.
a group of 12 people arrived to USSR from United States to cover the 50th anniversary of October Socialist Revolution in my country. From the first page to the last page, it was a package of lies, propaganda cliché, which were presented to American readers as opinions and deductions of American journalists. Nothing could be far from truth. These were not opinions. They were not opinions at all. They were the clichés which the Soviet propaganda wants American public to think that they think. If it does make any sense at all. It sure does, because from the viewpoint of the Soviet propaganda, although there are some subtle criticism of the Soviet system, the basic message is that Russia today is a nice, functioning, efficient system supported by majority of population. That's the biggest lie. And of course, American intellectuals and journalists from Look magazine elaborated on that untruth in various different ways. They intellectualized that lie. They found all kinds of justifications for telling lies to American public.
Okay, intellectuals that lie. I mean, back then, we're being lied to consistently, those who were in Russia. Do you not think that we're being lied consistently and being propagandized now by the same types of people? Okay, it's not in Russia, but the roles have reversed. We're being lied to every single day. And it's been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Donald Trump, the Steele dossier, more recently, the 50 people who signed the letter from the intelligence agencies that said that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation was a lie. I mean, can you imagine? And this is what blows my mind. We live in a country where top intelligence officials, 50 of them, said that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation, and it turns out to be wrong. How does that make you feel as an American, where these are the people that are protecting you? I mean, let's boil everything down and simplify it to the best of our ability instead of having false arguments. The bottom line is that we have a serious problem with our intelligence agencies. They're more worried about people like me. I'm a white supremacist. I'm the most dangerous person on the planet. Like, I am the most lethal, crazy person on the planet. These are the times that we're living in. Can you imagine? I am 50 years old, living in America, and I am the most dangerous human being on the planet. Really? I don't know what to say about that.
Excuse me, it was partly your job to make sure that they got these ideas, yes, and accepted them as their own ideas.
Right. Actually, even before they arrived to USSR, and they paid astronomical sum of money for that visit, they were submitted, this Novosti Press Agency developed so-called backgrounders. 20-25 pages of information and opinions which were presented to the journalists even before they bought their tickets to Moscow. They had to analyze the situation, and judging on their reaction to that backgrounder, the local Novosti representative or local Soviet diplomat in Washington D.C. would assess whether they be given visa to USSR or not.
Oh, so they were selected ahead of time.
Yes, they were pre-selected very carefully, and there is not much chance for honest journalists to arrive to USSR and to stay there for 1 year and to bring this package of lies back home. This, for example, is a centerfold of the Look magazine. They presented this monument erected by Communist Party in Stalingrad as the symbol, personification of Russian military might. And they said in the article, which is published on the site, that Soviets are very proud of the victory in the Second World War. This is another big myth, a lie. No sensible people would be proud to lose 20 millions of their countrymen in a war which was started by Genosse Hitler and Comrade Stalin and paid by American multinationals. Most of the Soviet citizens look at this type of monuments with disgust and sorrow, because every family lost father, brother, sister, or child in the Second World War. Yet American journalists who were trying to appease, to please their hosts, presented this picture on the centerfold as the symbol and personification of Soviet national, they call it Russian national spirit. And it was greatest misconception and out of the victory in the Second World War. This is another big myth, a lie. No sensible people would be proud to lose 20 millions of their countrymen in a war which was started by Genosse Hitler and Comrade Stalin and paid by American multinationals. Most of the Soviet citizens look at this type of monuments with disgust and sorrow, because every family lost father, brother, sister, or child in the Second World War. Yet American journalists who were trying to appease, to please their hosts, presented this picture on the centerfold as the symbol and personification of Soviet national, they call it Russian national spirit. And it was greatest...
Okay, so there you go. Russian, well, the United States, right after World War II, you can see all the propaganda coming forth. So here is a picture of something that people in the Soviet Union disgusted. They were disgusted with this picture. And the United States used this picture instead. And it seemingly was where all the propaganda started coming out of after World War II. And, you know, if you were to rewind past World War II, World War I, I mean, you know, it wouldn't make much sense where you wouldn't have this kind of propaganda. But after World War II is where all of this crazy stuff started happening. And where things just really got out of control. And it's interesting to see what's happening going in the last several years, how they lied to us about what's happening in plain sight in real time, and wondering about if it was the same way during turning points in the past, World War II, Civil War era, etc. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, things are, again, ever since World War II, we have all of this crazy shit going on. And I think the most alarming thing, beyond any reasonable doubt, is this neo-Bolshevism that's going on in America and in Europe. And it's hard for me to reconcile, because I look at Yuri Bezmenov and in this 1984 interview, and what he's describing is what's going on in America and in Europe right now.
To appease, to please their hosts, presented this picture on the centerfold as the symbol and personification of Soviet national, they call it Russian national spirit. And it was greatest misconception and a very tragic misunderstanding. Of course, Look magazine was not distributed in USSR. The main audience was in the United States. But I presume that many Americans, millions of Americans who were reading Look magazine at that time, had absolutely wrong idea about the sentiments of my nation, about what the Soviets are proud of and what they hate. This is a group, you see the same lady with the sword in Stalingrad. This is the group of journalists. Myself is in the center with the same devilish smile. And Mr. Philip Harrington is on the extreme left there with his camera. This is the gentleman which was so deaf or so uninterested in what I had to say to him. This is the same picture, a blow-up of the same picture. Many guests from various countries, in this particular case from Asia and Africa, were taken by me as a Novosti press agency employee for a tour across Siberia, for example. We would show them typical kindergarten, you see, nothing special by American standards, just nice children sitting, eating their breakfast or lunch. What they could not understand, or they pretended not to understand, that this is an exemplary kindergarten. This is not the kindergarten for average person or average family in USSR. And we maintain that illusion in their minds. You can see myself under the red spot in the middle there, with the same business-like expression. I'm doing my job. That's what I'm assigned to do, and that's what I was paid to do. But deep inside, I still hope that at least some of these useful idiots would understand that what they are looking at has nothing to do with the level of affluence in my nation. This is a better picture which reflects the true spirit of the Soviet childhood. This picture was printed in a Canadian government publication by mistake. In the middle you can see children playing on a small courtyard, and the caption goes, "This is a typical kindergarten in Siberia." What these idiots didn't understand, that it is not kindergarten at all. It is a prison for children of political prisoners. But there was not a single mentioning that what they were visiting actually was an area of concentration camps. And the job of people like myself to help them to not to notice that they are actually talking to prisoners. Most of the children were dressed, especially on the occasion of the foreigners' visit. Of course, there were no corpses on the ground. There were no machine gun guards. And well, it looks not very pleasant, as you see. It looks dull, but obviously it does not create an impression that this is actually a prison.
Well, did any of the journalists have the curiosity to ask about prisons and that kind of thing?
Yes.
They were in Siberia. This
yes.
is what you associate.
Some of them asked questions, and naturally we would give them, for the stupid question, we give them stupid answer. No, there are no prisons in Siberia. No, most of the people who you see are free citizens of USSR. They are very happy to be here, and they are contributing to the glory of the socialist system. Some of them pretended that they believe what I was telling them, and most of them, we may discuss it later, what are the motivations of these people? Why would they stubbornly bring lies to their own population through their own mass media? I have various answers to this. There is not a single explanation. It's a complex of explanations. It's fear, pure biological fear. They understand that they are on the territory of an enemy state, a police state. And just to save their rotten skins and their miserable jobs, their affluence back home, they would prefer to tell a lie than to ask truthful questions and report truthful information. Second, most of these schmucks were afraid to lose their jobs because, obviously, if you tell truth about my country, you will not last long as a correspondent of New York Times or Los Angeles Times. They will fire you. What kind of correspondent are you? You obviously cannot find common language with Russians if they kick you out in 24 hours. So, just...
What are we dealing with now? If you don't go along with the current regime, which is Biden, it's not Biden that's running things, but it's the people behind the scenes that are running things. What ends up happening? You end up getting fired. So what's happening at CNN? You have, before the debate even happened, you had Jake Tapper, of course, that would destroy Trump at every possible angle. I mean, I'm really shocked that he treated Trump with any respect at all, even calling him President Trump during the debate. But you could see how the state-run media, quote unquote, treats Donald Trump. And Yuri Bezmenov is saying this is how it works in a communist regime. And that's what we're dealing with right now. A communist regime. It's exactly what we have right now.
By trying to be conformist to their own editorial bosses, they tried not to offend the sentiments of the Soviet administrators and people like myself. Deep inside, I hope they would insult my or offend my sentiments. Obviously, they preferred not to. Another reason, I refuse to believe it, but obviously, there is another reason. Obviously, it's a greed. These people earn a lot of money. When they come back to USA, they claim that they are experts in my country. They write books which sells in million copies, titled like Russians, The Truth About Russia. Most of it is lie about Russia. Yet they claim to be Sovietologists. They play back myth about my country, the propaganda cliches. Yet they stubbornly resist the word of truth. If a person like Solzhenitsyn is either defecting or kicked out of USSR, they try all their best to discredit him and to discourage him. I don't have much chance to appear on national network with a true story about my country. But a useful idiot like Hendrik Smith or Robert Kaiser, they are big heroes. They come back from USSR, they say, oh, we were talking to dissidents in Russia. Big deal. Soviet dissidents are chasing American correspondents in the streets, and they are cowardly escaping from these contacts. For some strange reason, if you want to know more about Spain, you refer to Spanish writers. If you want to learn more about French, you read French writers. Even about Antarctica, I bet you would read Penguins. Only about the Soviet Union, for some strange reason, you read Hendricks and Schmendricks and all kind of Kissingers, because they claim that they know more about my country. They know nothing, or next to nothing, or they pretend that they know more than they actually do. I would say they are dishonest people who lack integrity and common sense and intellectual honesty. They bring back all kind of stories like that. A kindergarten in Siberia. Omitting the most important fact, it's a prison for children of political prisoners.
There you go. So again, 1984, he's talking about, Kissinger and et al., all of these people, and all the bullshit that we've been fed about Russia. Like Hollywood and government is the same thing, obviously working with the same goals and priorities. I don't know how it got to be like this or what all the motives are. All I can see for sure is that they got power and money and are working together to keep it that way. This guy sounds like one of the dissident doctors speaking about 2021, talking about how the establishment doesn't give them airtime because they're not going along with their narrative. Yeah. And this is what's crazy. What's crazy is that we're going through what the Soviets went through, the Soviet citizens went through. The propaganda, the lies, the bullshit. This guy, Yuri Bezmenov, said, "I'm the fuck out of here." Here's a guy who worked for the KGB and said, "I'm out. I'm not dealing with this shit anymore." I mean, he is like one of the guys. Like, he is one of the officers of, like our CIA, and said, "I'm out. I'm willing to risk my life and my family's life to come to the United States." And by the way, this is when the United States actually gave a shit about communism and wanted to destroy communism. And one of the things I'm going to go into is the Joseph McCarthy, where there is literally nothing about this guy trying to stop communism. And again, it's overly simplistic. There are things when it comes to the United States that are, it's pretty straightforward that, communists are trying to take over the United States. That's what's happening right now. I mean, if you look at Alejandro Mayorkas, Jew communist. Merrick Garland, Jew communist. I mean, you just go through, just tick down the list. The entire Biden administration, Jew communist. I mean, it's unavoidable. I mean, it's right there in front of your face. I mean, you can't get away from it. And it's this, again, history repeats itself. Here we are. History is repeating itself.
Another greatest example of monumental idiocy of American politicians. Edward Kennedy was in Moscow, and he thought that he is a popular, charismatic American politician who is easygoing, who can smile, dance at the wedding in Russian Palace of Marriages. What he did not understand, or maybe he pretended not to understand, that actually he was being taken for a ride. This is a staged wedding, especially to impress foreign media or useful idiots like Ed Kennedy. Most of the guests there, they had security clearance, and they were instructed what to say to foreigners. This is exactly what I was doing. You can see me in the same damn wedding palace in Moscow where Ed Kennedy was dancing here. You see, smiling. He thinks he's very smart. From the viewpoint of Russian citizens who observe this idiocy, he's narrow-minded, egocentrical idiot who tries to earn his own popularity through participation in propaganda farces like this. Here you can see myself. On the right, again, exemplary Soviet bride. On the left, 3 journalists from various countries, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Obviously, they enjoying the situation. They will go back home and write the reports. We were present on a regular Soviet wedding. They were not present on a regular Soviet wedding. They were present, they were part of a farce, of a circus performance. Another thing which I had to sometimes risking my life to explain to foreigners. Time magazine, for example, is very critical of South African racist regime. The whole article was dedicated to the shameful internal passport system where blacks are not allowing to live with whites. For some strange reason, for the last 14 years since my defection, nobody wanted to pay attention to my passport. This is my passport. It also shows my nationality, and it has a police rubber stamp, which is called propiska in Russian language, which assigns me to a certain area of residence. I cannot leave that area, same way as this black man cannot leave the area in South Africa. Yet we call South African government racist regime. Not a single Jane Schmonda or Fonda is brave enough, courageous enough to come to media and say, look, this is what happens in USSR. I send a copy of my passport to many American liberals and civil rights defenders and all the other useful idiots. They never bothered to answer me back. This shows what kind of integrity, what kind of honesty these people are. There
you go. He calls out, again, in 1984, calls out the liberalism of the press and the United States.
A bunch of hypocrites because they don't want to recognize a good example of racism in my country. This is the first stage of befriending a professor. You can see myself on the left with the same James Bond smile. On the right is my KGB supervisor, Comrade Leonid Mitrokhin, and in the middle a professor of political science in Delhi University. The next stage would be to invite him to a gathering of Indo-Soviet Friendship Society. There he is sitting next to his wife before he is being sent to USSR for free trip. Everything is paid by the Soviet government. He was made to believe that he is invited to USSR because he is a talented, sober-thinking intellectual. Absolutely false. He is invited because he is a useful idiot, because he would agree and subscribe to most of the Soviet propaganda cliché. And when he is coming back to his own country, he is going for years and years to teach the beauties of Soviet socialism to newer and newer generations of his students, thus promoting the Soviet propaganda line.
This is, again, hugely important. Useful idiot. When someone's offered money to talk about a particular subject, that's what ends up happening, is they will talk about it. And so, again, it's not this complicated thing when it comes to universities where they're teaching their kids a particular ideology. They're being told, if you don't, we're not going to pay you. Somebody like Rachel Maddow gets paid $30,000 a day. You look at MSNBC and what they say about Donald Trump and Biden. Even Fox News, it's all about money. It's all about a narrative.
The KGB was even curious about this gentleman. It may look innocent. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a great spiritual leader, or maybe a great charlatan and crook, depending on from which side you're looking at him. Beatles were trained at his ashram in Hardwar in India how to meditate. Mia Farrow and other useful idiots from Hollywood visited his school, and they returned back to United States absolutely zonked out of their minds with marijuana, hashish, and crazy ideas of meditation. To meditate, in other words, to isolate oneself from the current social and political issues of your own country, to get into your own bubble, to forget about troubles of the world. Obviously, KGB was very fascinated with such a beautiful school, such a brainwashing center for stupid Americans. I was dispatched by the KGB to check what kind of VIP Americans attend this school.
That's you on the left.
Yes, I'm on the left. I was trying to get enrolled in that school. Unfortunately, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi asked too much. He wanted $500 American for enrollment. But my function was not actually to get enrolled in the school. My function was to discover what kind of people from United States attend this school. And we discovered that yes, there are some influential members of family, public opinion makers of United States who come back with the crazy stories about Indian philosophy. Indians themselves look upon them as idiots, useful idiots. To say nothing about KGB, who looked at them as extremely naive, misguided people. Obviously, a VIP, say a wife of a congressman, or a prominent Hollywood personality, after being trained in that school, is much more instrumental in the hands of manipulators of public opinion and KGB than a normal person who understands, who looks through this type of fake religious training.
Why would they be more susceptible to manipulation?
I just mentioned that because, you see, a person who is too much involved in introspective meditation. You see, if you carefully look what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is teaching to Americans, is that most of the problems, most of the burning issues of today can be solved simply by meditating. Don't rock the boat. Don't get involved. Just sit down, look at your navel, and meditate. And the things, due to some strange logic, due to cosmic vibration, will settle down by themselves. This is exactly what the KGB and Marxist-Leninist propaganda wants from Americans, to distract their opinion, attention, and mental energy from real issues of the United States into a non-issues, into a non-world, non-existent harmony. Obviously, it's more beneficial for the Soviet aggressors to have a bunch of duped Americans than Americans who are self-conscious, healthy, physically fit, and alert to the reality. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi obviously is not on the payroll of the KGB. But whether he knows it or not, he contributes greatly to demoralization of American society. And he's not the only one. There are hundreds of those gurus who come to your country to capitalize on naivete and stupidity of Americans. It's a fashion. It's a fashion to meditate. It's a fashion not to be involved. So obviously, you can see that if KGB were that curious, if they paid my trip to Hardwar, if they assigned me to that strange job, obviously they were very much fascinated. They were convinced that that type of brainwashing is very efficient and instrumental in demoralization of the United States.
Our conversation...
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. But that is hugely important, what he just said. What did the KGB want to do? He wanted to keep, or they wanted to keep the United States, the citizens of the United States. They wanted them to be occupied with something that was outside of politics. And again, that's what's going on now, is the communists of the United States doesn't want you to be involved in politics. They don't want you to hear people like me. That's why they do everything they possibly can to, with YouTube and Facebook and everything else, control the narrative with what's going on in politics with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a communist playbook strategy. That's what this is. And that's why I wanted to play this tonight, is to show this is what's going on. This is what's happening. And we're an hour into an hour and 20 minutes, and I think that pretty much covers it. I don't want to continue on, but I'll probably go in and finish the rest of it at another night. But yeah, Kazan, they're not going along with the narrative. I mean, this is a plan. This is what's put in place by communists. 100%. That's what's going on. And 1984, when you listen to this guy, Yuri Bezmenov, telling you, yeah, this is what's going on. This is what we were told as KGB agents, how to demoralize the United States. Oh, no shit. Well, that's what's going on right now. There you go. That's what's happening. So, anyway, I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you. I will be doing this on a regular basis. I know I've said this a million times, but I will, even if it's 20 or 30 minutes, depending on what the subject is. Kazan, thanks for coming out. Kazan, are you on X by any chance? I'm wondering if you're following me there. I'm trying to get as many people as I can over to X, because it seems that there's just way more stuff going on there. But I'm going to shut down the live stream now. Thank you, all of you that came out tonight. And we'll see you. Have a great rest of the weekend. And see you maybe tomorrow night.